And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Laura Mays, who is the president of the Crenell Foundation, the board of trustees, the board of the Crenell Foundation, and the director extraordinaire of College of the Redwoods Fine Woodworking Program. Woohoo! Give it up for Laura Mays.
Thank you, Deirdre, and thank you to CIIS for this gallery and this space. It's hard to believe this is only the fourth year that we've had Handmade Mindmade. I'm wearing a t-shirt from year number 2, and we were in a space less than a quarter the size of this, quite literally, I think. So it's just amazing to have this space to display the work so well and have it lit so nicely. So a really big thanks to CIIS and to Deirdre in particular, who's worked incredibly hard at this. She's officially not working right now, but she just works all the time on it. So thank you to her. And just briefly what the Crenell Foundation is. The Crenell Foundation is financially supporting this show. It's a non-profit whose mission is to continue the legacy of James Crenell, who started the College of the Redwoods Fine Woodworking Program in 1981. It continues using his philosophy as a way to move forward. As Deirdre said, that's his workbench over there, and that's the cabinet beside it is the last cabinet that he made while he was a teacher at College of the Redwoods. And it's having a little face-off with a cabinet made by a student this year. So I'm really pleased to be moderating this topic this evening. It's something that I think about a lot for some reason. I'm not quite sure, although it also seems like a topic that can slip through your hands like sand, so you can't quite get a grasp on it, which means that there's sometimes a lot to talk about and other times what am I thinking about? Anyway, I hope that we're going to have a really interesting discussion. We've got a group of people here really interesting. I think they're going to have a lot to say. So we're looking at kind of exploring the making mind and how we use technologies and creating meaning out of what and how we make things. So the process of how things come into being, particularly the relationship between the handmade, or what we call the handmade, because every word that you use turns out to be kind of a contentious word. But anyway, what we call the handmade and technology, particularly digital technology, and how meaning derives from these processes. So the way we're going to structure it is I will introduce our panel in their kind of, in the dry way, kind of boring way, and then I'll let them do the interesting talking about themselves. So first we have Jace Asman, who is the Pure 9 Senior Creative Workshop Manager at Autodesk, where she leads the shop staff team and oversees the machine training curriculum, operations in the wood, metal, CNC and 3D print shops, and makes the workshop accessible to over 800 users. Jay is committed to creating spaces that empower others through hands-on learning. With a master's in architecture from MIT, a fine woodworking certificate from College of the Redwoods, and a BA from Brown University, her career spans craft and design, teaching and fabrication. She currently swims year-round off the San Francisco coast and is learning to repair her vintage Vespa. Next we have Donald Fortescue, who was born in Sydney, Australia, and moved to the United States in 1997 to head CCA's furniture design program. His work involves the use of digital technologies in tandem with antiquated technologies and craftsmanship, associated with expeditions of discovery from the Enlightenment era to the early 20th century. By combining these seemingly disparate technologies, he investigates their underlying meanings. He's currently a PhD candidate at the Australian National University, where his research explores congruencies between methodologies, aspirations, and limits of science and art. He's also a research fellow at the Centre for Art and Environment at the Nevada Museum of Art, and an artist collaborator at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. Mary Elizabeth Ybur is a multidisciplinary visual artist with a background in sculpture, furniture making, and exhibit development at the Exploratorium. She received her MFA from California College of the Arts in 2002. Her works explore language, cliché, iconography, repetition, and design through a variety of media, including acrylic, wood, metal, music, and performance. She was the recipient of Arteles residency in Finland last September and the 2015 San Francisco Arts Commission Individual Artist Grant. She works at Autodesk's Pier 9 workshop in San Francisco as an instructor and consultant to the Creative Projects Exhibits Group. And at the end there is Matt Hutchinson. He trained as an architect and earned a Bachelor of Architecture at Kent State University and a Master of Architecture at Yale University. Hutchinson's previous professional design experience, ranging from Vincent James Associates in Minneapolis to Shop Architects and Face Design, both in New York City among others, has afforded him a diverse and multidisciplinary perspective. And me, I'll just set me through the back, please. I'm an Irish woodworker and designer. I trained as an architect with a Bachelor of Architecture from University College Dublin, but I wanted to get into a closer relationship between design and making, and I started woodworking. Since 2011, I've been the program director and one of the instructors at the Fine Woodworking program at the College of the Redwoods, up beyond the Redwood Curtain, about 200 miles north of here. My own work explores the intersections of craft and design, the personal and the abstract, technology and the handmade. Okay, so that's most you're going to hear from me. Jay, do you want? I'm going to start you.
Sure.
Oh, no, that is.
Great. Yeah, do you mind if I just click?
Yeah.
Great. So I'm the senior shop manager of Pier 9. I'm going to introduce that space to you through a series of really quick images so that you get a sense of what we're doing. We're literally on Pier 9 over the bay off of the Embarcadero in San Francisco. We have a variety of shop spaces all underneath our as part of our shop. We have a fantastic wood shop. We have a commercial test kitchen. I put this slide in here because it's supposed to make you ask questions about why, but I'm going to keep going. We have a CNC workshop. We have a metal shop with all of the analog versions of our CNC equipment, like our manual mill and manual lathe, an electronics lab, textiles and paper and photography space, a 3D print shop. And this slide, there happen to be many people here in this slide, but I say that I have this in here because we have these fantastic spaces. We have a beautiful view of the bay, but what makes our space really run are the shop staff. And those are the folks who know how to operate all of the machines. They introduce all of our users to the machines, and they set the culture in our shop. And really, the thing that impacts people the most is the culture of our shop. The rest of the machines in the setting reinforce that it's a fantastic place to be. So that's my quick intro to Pier 9, and then I want to show you a little bit about my own work. This is the project I'm most proud of from my College of the Redwoods experience. I took that slab of walnut, I made my own hand planes and created this chair, which is based on a Carl Malmsten design. You can see another version of this chair in the back. It's a great part of the College of the Redwoods tradition that there are photo albums in the front alcove. Students often flip through those to figure out what they want to do next, and so there are a lot of repeat projects. So I'm pretty excited to see that somebody else has done their own version of it. I've also spent time working for architects here in the city, expanding on some of my College of the Redwoods furniture and building other special commissions. And I went from one end of the spectrum at College of the Redwoods to the other end of the spectrum and did my master's in architecture at MIT. It couldn't have been more different. The above the redwood curtain is 20 people in a bench room with the sound of hand tools. This was a 3.5-year experience at the center of technology, and it really pushed me to expand my thoughts about design and craft. And I then worked in a few digital fabrication firms doing things like this exhibit for Zaha Hadid. And this is the scale. It was installed in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Completely different ends of the spectrum. Really, really fantastic experience. And this is the piece that I most recently created in collaboration with R. Lee in Los Angeles. So we tried to do something in the hybrid zone of craft and digital fabrication. The two end tables come from a walnut slab. We had a butterfly joint in there to keep the slab together, but all these spires that are out of cast concrete, we made through a process of digital 3D printing, and then casting and then fitting. So it was a lot of fun to work between those two spaces on this project, between the traditional and the digital stuff.
So Donald, I'll bring up your website.
Okay. Yeah, you can just. So, as a prelude to this, we were expected to kind of have 2 images.
Yeah.
And so, not that I'm outing you at all, but
Gotcha.
and so I was thinking, what 2 images could possibly summarise, for me, 30 years of making and, working across a diverse background. So I thought I'd just take one little slice through my website of the work that I'm showing, just to kind of raise some of these questions about the digital and the handmade as a way of sort of thinking, starting the conversation, I guess. And for me, this was a really seminal piece for me recently, a fairly recent piece. I think it was fabricated in 2008. And it has a couple of characteristics which are probably not, for me, were strange things as a woodworker, as a trained woodworker and furniture designer. 1, it's not a functional furniture piece. 2, there's quite a lot of digital fabrication. And 3, it was a collaboration. It was actually work that I did in collaboration with a sculptor friend, Lawrence LaBianca. And this was shown for the first time at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts as part of Bay Area Now something 5, I think. I can never remember which Bay Area Now it was in. And it's part of a kind of a trajectory of work that I'm doing now, as Lauren mentioned at the very beginning, which is to kind of try and conflate traditional techniques of making with contemporary ways of making as well. And so this piece called Sounding, based on a chapter from Moby Dick, was a fabricated metal cabriole leg table, which you can see down at the bottom. And we dumped it in the ocean for about 2 months, 3 months to get a really nice crusting of barnacles and shrimp on the outside of it. Really, when we pulled it out, we thought the museum's going to love this. They're going to really love the dead shrimp that were flipping around on the ground as it was coming out. And then the horn part is polycarbonate that's been CNC'd and then lashed together with zip ties. And throughout the whole piece, there's a sound component, and so we recorded the sound of the piece buried while it was underwater. Just a local, it was down at Pillar Point actually, and then to experience the piece, you stand under the horn, which for me, the whole thing's about 12 foot tall. So, the horn would be up here on me if I was standing up, and you hear there's a very projected sound under that, and there's the sound of the ocean circulating around as you stand underneath it. So it's sort of something I think is when we think about craft and when we look around the objects around us, we think of the solo artist making their work at their workbench, inspired by the materials or their experience, and then realising something that they're bringing into the world. And for me now, I'm much more interested in collaborating, working with other people, bouncing off other people, engaging with other people. And you've talked about this as well, Jay. And also, for me, craft has always been about exploring. I love being in my own workshop. I love being in my own studio. I love making things by myself, but I've always used it as an excuse to get into other people's studios and see what they're doing as well. Even as an undergraduate student, I was, sneaking over to the hot glass workshop all the time to try and get them to make things for me, because I just wow, I don't want to blow glass, but I love watching other people do it. And I'm still like that. I'm still using my own craftsmanship as kind of a form of leverage to get into other people's workshops, get into other people's minds, other ways of thinking as well, and trying to kind of bring that quiver of experience, knowledge into my own set of object making as well. Will I have a look at some more slides? Or let's just scroll down one. Keep going. Next one. Keep going. Yeah, so this object is one of the first objects where I started making. This was in 2001, I think, something like that, which was on a residency in Australia, my home country. But I'd been living in the States for a long time at that stage, and I went back to Australia to do an artist in residency. And for me, that mode of operating has also become really important. I think I love being in my own studio. I can't imagine, even coming in here today was fairly hard because I've been in my studio all day, and so being dragged out and having to wash and get the glue off my fingertips and come here was a challenge. But I've always loved the notion of what happens when you leave your studio? What happens when you get out of your workshop? What happens when you escape to a place where you don't have, the tools that you're used to using, the facilities that you're used to using? How do you exercise your creativity in that realm? And so increasingly, since I made this piece, I've been focusing my work based on working in places that I feel uncomfortable and difficult to work at as well, things where I don't have control over the materials and resources around me, but I have to improvise with what's going on as well. And so I think that aspect of it is something I find really interesting now as well, that kind of notion of how do you use craftsmanship as a way of exploring not just other people's workshops and your own experience of life, but how do you use it to explore the world as well? And I've always found that making things is a really, really great way of connecting with people, audiences and other makers, but people all around the world as well. So I'm as much as possible nowadays, I'm using my craftsmanship as a way of escaping and going off and exploring other places and fabricating things while I'm there that sort of bring the quality of those places into the work that I'm making. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Let's start there. So I have about 15 years experience working as an exhibit developer at the Exploratorium, and I went there right after getting my master's with an emphasis in furniture making, working with Donald at CCA, and I was in the woodworking program, but I worked mostly in metal, and so I started at the Exploratorium as an intern because I was good at welding, and so it led to jobs, and it led to sort of me just being out of grad school and sort of fitting within the Exploratorium culture and having access to this incredible shop. And so I really started working mostly in wood once I started building and developing exhibits, which is ironic because I
couldn't get you to touch a piece of wood.
Yeah, I mean, I did do some like walnut lamination where I was like, that's pretty nice stuff, but no, I'm going to powder coat this metal instead. It's for furniture. Yeah, so, that worked out. Let's see. I have no documentation of that work because it's all in physical slides, and Jay and I were laughing about this earlier. So, but it exists, or it did exist. But there's some technology craft bit, because I remember setting those slides up, or those pictures up to take those. But this was an exhibit I'm really proud of because I felt like it was the first time as an exhibit developer where I really was able to be an artist in my work. And I fought really hard to not have labels all over my pieces, and it was really about exploring what happens when you take a simple geometric shape and you rotate it, and then you get to travel through it. And it was a grant that was called Geometry Playground, and I'm not strong in math, and the grant was focused on girls and their parents who were aged 5 to 13, and really developing exhibits for them where they could be empowered to be in the classroom to learn about math and to understand spatial reasoning, and make exhibits for them where they were welcome to learn and explore. And we learned a lot of things about gender and equality in the classroom, and we designed 2 butt benches so the girls wouldn't get bumped off the exhibit by their male classmate. So it was just a really informative and exciting time to be developing exhibits. And so there's a few more. You can just click through those. There was cubes and tunnels, but this was where I really started working in 3D drawing, and so there's where these things are stack laminated pieces of wood. I think if you just click on it next. Yeah. Just kidding. Okay, anyway, there's a trap trapezoid, and an ellipse. There's tunnels, and there's cubes, but and they're 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet, or 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet. But I had to draw them in Inventor, and so that was my first foray into 3D design. And then to fast forward, I lost my studio as a result of the first .com and then the second .com. Like, my work really had to change from this big physical stuff. So I started working in, and don't go there yet if you don't mind, sorry. Because I mean, Jay got 90 slides. I might as well show a few more. I know you don't want me to do this. But I used to work after I was working, so we'll just do these, but then we'll go around.
Okay.
I stopped working in such big stuff because I didn't have the space to do it, and then I got asked to be in an art show, and I had to do a drawing, but I don't draw, and so I was working in duct tape and contact paper, and so this is all duct tape and contact paper, and I just figured out a way to work in a two-dimensional way, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I don't have to have a generator and a welder, and I don't have to have all this equipment. I can listen to records and be in my room. This is grueling. So, but then there came a time where I got really burnt out on this kind of work, and it was all about the craft of it and the technicality of it, but there was no more joy left in it. So I actually had and that's a sound sculpture. There's always been sound and performance sort of integrated in my work. But then I got out of tape, and now I'm working in Illustrator, which is the Lexicon series, and this is the stuff that has to do with language. And this is all inlaid acrylic. So I'm gotten back to drawing, but with digital drawing, so it's a more immediate and more fun way for me to work. And then using a laser cutter to cut out all the designs and then inlaying them in. So the hand is still there, but it's just a way more immediate and archival and fun way for me to be working. So, and as an aside, I'm also working on a record album having to do with language and cliches. So my practice really kind of runs the gamut, but there's a thread there, I guarantee you. But it's hard to tell you in 2 minutes. Matt?
We'll come back to you.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yep, so as Laura said, my background's in architecture. I'm actually a licensed architect. However, despite that, I found, working for many years for a lot of different practices, that architecture proper was just never as hands-on as I wanted it to be. I worked in some practices where it was more or less, but that led to me, I think, seeking out either employment, but now in my own work, the type of work or projects that span design and making as equal as they can be. And that consequently has led me to develop a really strong interest, I think, in the potential for overlap or reciprocity, I guess, between thinking and making, between hand and machine craft, and between analog and digital processes. So the outlet for those interests has kind of become my own practice, design practice, called Path. And I think of it, I guess you could kind of break it into three categories. There's custom work, and that's architecture and interior design services, as well as the design and fabrication of custom architectural components, furniture, and so forth. And there's the sort of the product category, which is self-initiated designs and small, I guess, in small production, very small production of those designs. Because of, and that's mostly, I guess, lighting and furniture so far. Because of my background in architecture, that I'm always kind of linking it back to maybe a bigger the prototypes to bigger architectural ideas or agendas, systems, I guess I would call them. And then the third aspect is research. And so this is usually material and machine process, just call them explorations. That they might not have any sort of immediate use at all. It's just outside of themselves. But ideally, it folds back into the custom work or even the product. So, like one instance is, and this is hard. This is at a scale that's much bigger than, I don't have this equipment. I've been visiting places that have tube laser cutters that will take huge pieces of steel tube, 12 inches in diameter, all the way down to 1/2 inch, up to 40-foot lengths, and there's a laser head that will turn these things around. And we're using them, my shopmate and I are using them in some bigger stuff, but I'm now trying to work this into some private sort of residential architectural components that I'm doing. So that's really exciting when that kind of research of that kind of work comes back into the practice, into like what would be used to be really seem out of your reach. It's very, very, very doable now. I also teach architecture. I'm an adjunct in the architecture department at CCA. I teach architecture design studios, as well as some material and fabrication seminars. So that's, yeah. If you want to pick any of those, I really have a preference. There's, I mean, it runs quite. So these, and a lot of these things are just ongoing. Like I said, they're prototypes, and they turn into something else. These were early pieces that combine, laser cutting of a top and bottom template, and then you've got the thin veneers of wood. In some cases, I'm actually cutting veneer pieces. In this case, mahogany. This is actually a very, very large lamp, and some are much smaller. Some of them are just off-the-shelf pieces of basswood. Some of these are glued in place. Others, it's simply the tension, and the lamp starts to torque under its own sort of material force and hold itself together. So this is, an instance where, and I've actually come to like. This is an old project, but I've come to really like these sorts of combinations where you've got something that's very exacting, like the laser cutter, with something that's very hard to predict or model in any sort of realistic way in the computer. And that's the material, the resistance of the veneers. And it just does what it does. And a lot of times, from one veneer to the next, subtle differences in the wood, they're not perfect. And you have to, embrace that if you want to keep moving forward in that line of exploration.
Okay, thank you all. So I prepared a list of questions that they've had in advance. And Don, you kind of touched on it already about craft itself, what craftsmanship is and what it does for you. David Clyde described craft as a good word to start an argument with. And it is a word that has both positive and kind of negative connotations. Is it a word you identify with yourselves? And how does it relate to your work? I won't ask Don because we already kind of answered that. It's like a key to get into other people's workshops. But if you wanted to talk about craft as a word that you use.
Craft is a word to identify with. I think it's yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so much to it. People use it as a term in so many different ways. I also think that in my experience, a lot of my work has been in a world that I would call digital craft. And I think that you touched on this too, which is like looking at those projects that you might be doing a large component of the project inside the computer, but there is still craft to it. And in order for something to come out of the computer and be meaningful in real life, you have to have an understanding of those materials and a relationship with the materials, and you have to then be able to make decisions about it once it's in real life. I also think, for me, craft can be a bigger word about an approach to the world. Maybe that's too big, but I think it is about observation, it's about time, it's about patience, it's about exploration and practice. I don't know, there are a million words to heap onto that pile, but I do think that it has a character, and that it's something that you see reflected back in the work that you make.
Get the time thing, I think it's a luxury of time. I think it's about risk and mitigating risk. If you trust in yourself and you've developed practice over time, it is about craft. I think it is like you can take on things that might be risky to some that aren't so risky in the hands of the craftsmen, so you can think of it that way. Yeah, I think Jay hit on it as a larger process as well. It's like as an approach. For me, it's like a feedback loop, and the luxury of time to have that to try something, test it out, get the results, or react to that in some way, and then do it again until you. But that can apply to like so many other things outside of just a piece of furniture.
I feel it's a loaded word, and it's got quite a history, but for me personally, craft is essential to my work, and I care so deeply about materials when I'm working with them, and I care so much about good craftsmanship the more I work. And it's really something that's grown with me over time. The integrity of how things are made matters more and more, and so I have a deep respect for craft, and I really care about it in my own work, but there is such a loaded word, and it means something very specific to me, but like the folksy craft, it turns into a whole different thing. But yeah, it's not a word I dislike.
Maybe it's a noun versus verb thing as well. I think I think there's the. It's interesting hearing the way each of you have talked about it. It's really about the process of the experience of engaging with materials and the process of bringing things into the world, and have your attention and the kind of the resources you bring to that, the histories you bring to that as well. I think that's something that is traditionally associated with the notion of craft. Is that there's a history of making behind it. And as craftspeople, we dig into that. We explore the histories of making. If anyone who's a woodworker, just all the folklore about Japanese planes versus Western planes, and then sort of the micro bevels and secondary bevels and all of that stuff, which we'll geek out on terribly. It's great. It's lovely, that stuff. But it's all about the kind of history. It's a culture around that. Maybe that's one of the things where digital craft is starting to get that culture now, when people are kind of, talk about the kind of, first generation of digital devices, and how, the way coding has changed, the way that's become really intrinsic in the way we work around digital work. Maybe that's only, 50 years old, that kind of technology, as opposed to woodworking. How far do we want to go? It's like hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps, if before we were Homo sapiens, perhaps. And then there's so for me, the notion of craft as a kind of process is really critical, as opposed to craft as in like, is that a piece of craft, or is that a piece of craft? Sort of like the noun side of it is problematic. And getting back to Pi, I love that, his definition of the workmanship of risk. You mentioned risk as well, that notion that if something can be, is at risk in the process of manufacturing, like this thing, there was never any risk involved in that. It was just like turned out probably in sort of a series of production methodologies that have been honed and worked until eventually you could just make a bazillion of these things. So maybe there's no workmanship or risk in that. That for me is when the kind of craft disappears, when the risk disappears as well.
I think interesting what you're saying when you are dealing with the woodworking tradition going back however many tens of thousands of years we choose to say that it has been around. You're dealing with material, whereas digital stuff, in a way, you're dealing with other people's brains. You're dealing with the coding that somebody else has put in there. So it's perhaps less. I often am thinking about what did the person who put this program together want you to be doing. Yeah, so you're more making it. Yeah.
But I think on that tip, like I think craft and tradition comes with responsibility. So you don't just pick up a tool and you don't just make a hand plane and say like, I'm the first person who's ever made this hand plane. You recognize that it comes from a tradition of hand planes that were built in a specific way for their purposes. And I think there's a real danger in looking at digital work and saying it doesn't come from a tradition, because then you absolve the creator from responsibility. And I think for those situations where you're talking about you experience that technology and you think like, who designed this and for whom and why? Those are important questions, because that project that you're engaging with then isn't necessarily holding true to the groundwork or asking the important questions. And I think when you get into a practice of something like woodworking, where you're looking at this cabinet and you're thinking, I've drawn these dovetails in my sketch at my desk. Now to make them, I'm going to commit the next 44 hours to honing my chisel and going back and honing and cutting and honing and cutting. You're making that decision over and over and over again. And I think with some of the digital processes, there is an instantaneousness that you can skip over that process. But and I think we all recognize this in the things that we value and that we see as good work, that somebody has made that space in the process to consider and to ask questions about why they're doing it and for whom and what the results would be. And so I think to recontextualize craft for the digital and to think about the process and the space and the tradition means responsible projects in a digital space.
I also think the hand is never absent when it's purely digital. You cannot just draw something and it doesn't get spit out unless it's maybe on a Moriseki, like a $1 million machine that actually does spit out a widget.
Even then, you have to be familiar with materials and
Yeah.
thermal expansion.
You have to
and
know so very much about
P's and
how
T's.
things are going to work. And so like the human and the hand and the personal connection to whatever it is not absent with a robot, you know, and the more information you have about the material or how the robot's going to behave, like you then, it's as if you're working with your favorite saw and making that dovetail, you know, like
it's just in a different medium.
and you kind of just hone that relationship, and then all of a sudden there's this finesse in working with this giant, you know, or this 5-axis water jet where you can get it to do what you want, but you have to do so much work in the background.
Yeah, I think there's kind of in my mind, there's like maybe two big misconceptions about digital craft, digital fabrication. The first is that that it is sort of instantaneous, and that a lot of the craftsmanship is taken out of it. It's either in the program or it's whatever, and nothing could be further from the truth as we're talking about. Another misconception though is by the users. I see this a lot of times with students that do assume that it is perfect, that the digital realm and the material realm are one and the same, and they're just not. And so inexperience with traditional tools, traditional processes is definitely reflected on, in projects, digital fabrication projects that are very rudimentary or, first time. I just, like I said, with students, you see it all the time, or you see stuff that's been spit out of machines as if it's finished. Forget the tolerances and those sort of things, but just ignoring this whole realm of post-processing, of sanding pieces, go figure, of finishing, of making it look like maybe it's not right from a laser cutter. One of the issues with digital fabrication that I have is that it's become really trite and predictable because of this, because some of this is because of the software, of the underlying sort of, the common denominator it's ubiquitous now. And so that's why I enjoy overlap between the two, because it's something new. It's a new exploration. To me, there's still a lot of exploration in that.
So, now I have a question.
Yeah.
But I think, like, so in this, one of my concerns is that we're doing ourselves a disservice by creating these videos where we like show somebody, you know, toiling at their desk doing a sketch, and then you show the robot arm building the thing. And I think that we're doing something in here where we're reinforcing this story. And we're reinforcing a specific story, and we're not necessarily exploring this other story, which is like all of the pieces that came off of that XYZ machine that we then spent so many hours, you know, taking the burr off of the edge, sanding, finishing, making connection with the powder coater across the other side of the bay, having them mess up the part, starting over again, doing, you know, there's this whole other line of these stories that isn't getting told that I think is worked into some of the mythology of the lone woodworker, where you're...
It's now the lone digital practitioner.
Yeah. That there's like the sense that like you have to work for years to get the dovetail right, but we don't talk about that with robots. We don't talk about that with CNC machines, but I think it's in there.
There's a desire there for it to be really easily digestible and understood, and people want it to be the future, and it is really easy, and you know, click, print, and you've got your piece, you know.
I was just talking to a friend of mine who used to work with Apple, and we were, I think I said CAD monkey, and she was like, whoa, we don't say that. We say digital sculptors. And I was like, okay. But she had a good argument. She's like, they might not be at the forefront of engineering, but what they bring is a really aesthetic understanding of how something is going to, because they're more of an industrial design coming from that bent. And so that just made me think about when people are just super good at this 3D drawing realm and you know, it not just being like clicking buttons and being great at tolerances and all of this, but thinking about it, digital sculpting, and actually giving some more weight and worth to what they're practicing, and that it is a practice. So it was nice to hear that.
There can be space for creativity within this ubiquitous software.
But language is very important, and this book that you reference a lot in the questions is so interesting to me, and it's called, you know the name of it?
Thinking through craft.
Thinking Through Craft. You should get it. It's amazing. The 3 pages I've so far read. But how language around craft has either done it a huge service or disservice, and just parsing that is fascinating. And this is the first question you've asked, and we don't shut up, so it's rich.
Well, because you're actually addressing a lot of the issues that I sent out to you. Here's one. Does living and working in the Bay Area, the breeding ground for tech and digital innovation, have an impact on your work? Like, what's it like to actually be here, as opposed to someone else? In your kind of, your human daily lives as well as your working lives. You're looking at.
I mean, yes and no. I think, like, yes, like I had a residency at Autodesk at the Pier 2 years ago. So it's had, in that sense, a very direct impact on how I work, and that sort of creative environment, all the support, all the collaborative effort there is something I very much appreciate and I'm into. But then I think on the other side, the other counter to that, a lot of the tech here is something I'm not that interested in. It's maybe about a lot of problem solving and engineering, but maybe doesn't necessarily get at clarity of design or a lot of other things that I am interested in. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, it's about the fact that almost any way you'd like to work is available to you here, apart from a cheap workshop. Which would be nice if that was available here as well. And but I think that allows a kind of it should allow a kind of criticality to maybe what you're talking about. That sort of notion that you, like having access to water jet cutting and a CNC machine and getting things fabricated and all of that it's not, it doesn't feel like it's cutting edge really here. It feels like it's just part of the ecosystem that we work within. And I can imagine, well, I know living in, coming from the places I work in Australia still, those things, the things that I take for granted here, people are just like, oh my God, you have access to that here, and so I think that it comes back to that notion of responsibility, that when you do have access to almost everything, it's a smorgasbord of ways of fabricating. You have to take a critical stance about what you do and how you do it. So I always have to make that decision. Am I going to, hone my tools for 40 hours and work on something, or am I just going to go and get someone to CNC something for me, or will I get it fabricated, or do I have to really feel like I'm part of that process, in which case I don't just farm it out to someone, I enter a relationship with someone and kind of develop a kind of like a collaborative way of working with them, where their input is as important as my input. I'm not just specifying something. So I think for me it's great from that point of view. It allows you to kind of negotiate a really complicated way of making, which I think is from my point of view as a designer or an artist or a sculptor or a craftsman, those things, even just like when you asked earlier, what are we? It's just like I saw a lot of people putting their hand up again and again and again, and it's negotiating that kind of spectrum is really freeing in the area. I think you can work across lots of different ways, and they're all accepted and they're all valid ways of working in some ways. Although the thing about the big shed for $100 a month, that's now beginning to kind of weigh on me. I think it's sort of Mary Elizabeth and I were talking beforehand about the difficulty of getting that kind of space that traditionally, I guess, would have been the craftsman's haven, kind of like 6,000 square feet of cheap space where you could buy a bunch of old machines and set them up and have zero overhead and explore within that. That's not available in the Bay Area.
You have problems with getting broadband even. So,
That's right.
So how do you feel about collaborative spaces like Tech Shop, with these kinds of things springing up? Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think it's...
I think it's a good thing, but I've never used Tech Shop personally. I've got access to CCA, and so I use CCA in a similar way, I guess. I think there's something about the kind of general purpose multi-access, you can do anything you like within this space, could provide a limitation, even though it seems like it's really open at the same time. Yeah. But it also allows people to have access to that culture
that wouldn't have
an inroad into that culture, which they might not get otherwise. So it's fantastic from that point of view.
That really touches on, I'd like to answer your question, but that really touches on the whole maker movement, where people are like, I'm a woodworker now because I just used the plane at the tech shop. It's so, there's so much education that's lost when you have a multi-use space, but it's so important that people are able to get their hands on tools in an urban setting, because there's just not that opportunity. Mm-hmm. But I've lived in the city for a very long time, and it's changed. The landscape's changed quite a lot, and I've worked at the Exploratorium for a lot of the time I've lived here, and I know as much as I was there so much because I believed in the mission, I was also there because I had access to a shop all the time where I could make whatever, all the side jobs, all the things, personal projects, and for me a shop is essential to me as an artist, and I do have a studio, and I feel like San Francisco's been really great to me, and I'm lucky enough to be able to live and work here. But now that I'm at Pier 9, I'm in this really beautiful, well-equipped shop with a ton of really, really smart practitioners. So I'm lucky to be in the city to have access to these things. I did a 3-week program at Fort Bragg, and the absence of all of that was really humbling. And we were doing, you know, I just like got rid of all the skin on my fingers when I was honing my blades. You know, that was a thing. I was like, they're just bleeding. You know? But the absence of all of that, even internet, I'm like, I'm just giving up. Who cares? You know, like, why don't I just walk to the beach because I can? That was also really good and generative, and I contemplated many, many, many times. I tried to figure out how could I make it work that I could do that 9-month program. But having worked at a nonprofit my whole life, I was like, I simply can't. You know, so, you know, just the economics of it. So being in the city, in this particular city, it's exciting, and like all the tech stuff, doesn't resonate with me as much, but being at Pier 9, it very much resonates. But the financial part is a part of the, yeah, it is.
Jay, do you want to talk about being living and working here?
This is a hard question. I've also lived in the city for about 15 years off and on. I think for me, like, the physical place has a big impact. I try and spend some portion of every summer backpacking. I've been swimming in the bay a lot. I think for me, that being part of the, like, recognizing the ecosystem that we actually live in is really important for me. I'm not sure exactly how it impacts my work, besides like the temperature here is really comfortable for me. I don't like to get too hot. But I do think that there's, I see this realm of, and the community around Pier 9, the community of other people I know who make furniture, make things, is vibrant, even though the whole community is underneath this weight of real estate in the Bay Area. Still, I think, like, those connections are rich, and I see that, like, that to me does not intersect or overlap very heavily with, like, the tech economy that's happening in Silicon Valley, and so I feel sort of buffered from that.
But isn't what's happening in Silicon Valley feeding to Autodesk, which is
Yeah.
feeding down to people who use those machines? It's all part of the same.
It is. It would be impossible to parse it. And saying all that, I'm working for a software company.
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. I don't even, I'm like so deep in the whirlwind there, I'm not even sure that I should be answering the question.
Do you have a conflict of interest?
Okay, so Mary Elizabeth touched on the maker movement there. And, how interested are you in the maker movement in each of you? And do you think it affects reception of your work when everyone thinks they're a woodworker after the...
I'm happy to answer this question right now.
Okay.
And with all due respect to people who call themselves makers, that term doesn't resonate with me. I'm not a fan of the maker movement. And that's, I know, controversial thing to say out loud, and in the city especially. I think people should make things, and I think it's great to, it's a hard question for me to answer because I can't be terribly articulate about it. It's more of a visceral feeling. And that is weird, like, why do I feel so strongly about this? But there's something that irks me about maker culture, and I don't know if it has to do with a disassociation from materials and understanding craft. I'm not quite sure what it is. I've done a lot of thinking on this and really tried to articulate what exactly it is, but I don't myself view myself as a maker, and I don't actually think it affects the perception of my work, at least in the community my work is within. So, but I think tech shop's important. I know that it's important for people to be able to weld what they need to weld, and like, I think that these spaces are important. I think that tinkering spaces for people are important. I think that it's a way into education and getting your hands on things. So I'm conflicted, but
yeah, at the very least, it's great if people get into some DIY stuff and understand how things are made, and maybe taking that a step further, understand or gain an appreciation for the things they buy, why certain things are more expensive or take longer than cheap things or whatever. I'm with Mary Elizabeth. I don't identify as a maker. I think my problem with it is like just the mainstreaming, the commercialization. Like if you think of craft as culture, I think of sort of the maker movement as consumption, and it's like just being marketed to, and like buy this 3D printer and you're a maker. You know, it's like more, it's like making without being self-critical. And I think that's something you learn in the professional world or in design school, is to think through what you're doing and be really self-critical. Especially architecture, it's like pounded into you, like so critical of everything. And I think that's maybe missing from at least my perception of the maker culture.
I also think that at least one time I was looking at Make magazine, and my friend and I were just sort of flummoxed. Like, isn't the point to look in your closet and pick out all the stuff and make something of that? It's not to go out to Target or IKEA and buy a bunch of garbage and then make more garbage that hangs over your table, you know, just like a garbage house. Like, what is it's a bad idea, you know, and so...
It's consumer grade garbage.
It's consumer grade garbage, and so if that's your thing, awesome, and that is a lot of people's thing, which is awesome for them. But I think that that's the real issue, is that it's not educational, it's just more consumerism. Yeah.
But that's also applied to, you know, the craft world and the art world, and you know, I think it's, you know, there's some people who will never progress sounds judgmental in some ways, but you know, kind of evolve. No, that's the wrong word. move through that, you know, and will come out through that experience and be hunting and hungry for more and more and more, and they're the people who will end up like we've ended up, you know, kind of avariciously, you know, feeding on that part of it, then going out the other end and finding other ways to deepen our kind of engagement with the kind of the culture of making, you know, and so it's kind of like the entry-level drug, you know, and it's just like paint by numbers or something like that, you know. You've done some paint by numbers, if I recall.
What? No.
You've done some really good paint by numbers. But it's, you know, I think there's you need the entry-level drug, you know, and so there's that level of it. But I think in terms of the question is like, how does that affect appreciation of what I might do? I don't think it helps at all, you know.
Does it help at all?
Yeah.
Does it affect it at all?
It doesn't affect it at all either, you know. I think it's sort of, unless someone walks into, like, I would like to think that, you know, people would walk into this amazing collection, and I walk into it and go like, how the hell did they do that? You know, I've got a pretty good idea of pretty much how everything was made in here, but there's still some things that was like, nice move, you know. So that level of kind of connoisseurship, I think, not of connoisseurship in the sense of like, you know, that's more expensive than that, but just a kind of appreciation of what goes into it, that can start in those places, and if it just dies in those places, that's terrible, you know, but it can grow through that. And so I'd like to think that they're kind of like, you know, the kind of apparent simplicity of that is a gateway drug to a kind of much more sophisticated cultural understanding of our engagement with materials and processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like a spreading out, spreading roots.
I like that. The maker movement is a gateway drug. We gotta get that up on Instructables. Yeah. So like a key part of the Pier 9 workshop is that the shop was originally built as an extension of Instructables, which is like the largest online community of makers. And I will say, I also am very critical of the term maker, of the maker movement, but I'm not that critical of Instructables because I see like so much joy come out of that vehicle. Both among the people who work there, who seem to be like delighted to dress up in tutus and whatever else to come to work, And then also in the joy of the community and how they communicate with each other, the support they give each other for their weekend projects. I think there's like a lot of great stuff there. I think there's also this, I guess I see again this space where it seems like the maker movement like dropped out of the clouds and like landed as the maker movement. And then Make Magazine sort of like gave it a name and a thing. But there's so much more to it. And I think in some ways it does, it is hard to reconcile that with what the Pier is now, which is this like incredibly sophisticated, well-run, like showcase workshop. Because a lot of people come through and go, oh, this is like a maker space on crack. And I'm like, it's actually not. It has nothing to do with a maker space. Because we are, it takes so much more than just opening up your garage and like plugging the stuff in. You know, there's so much behind creating a space that looks like makerspace on crack that actually isn't connected to the idea of makerspace. So I think that I see something in there that is difficult to reconcile, and I think that there's more to be opened up about what maker means, because I just read this article and I shared it with you that was up on KQED recently, talking about the Tinker Space at the Exploratorium and how creating that Tinker Space, inviting young people in and making the tools 100% accessible really doesn't look at the cultural backgrounds and experiences that those kids are coming in with. And so when they had some exercise where they would hand the kids a toy and say, okay, here's the screwdrivers, like take it apart, explore the toy. And a lot of the kids really had emotional responses to that, didn't want to take the toy apart. From wherever they were coming from, whether that's their cultural background, their economic background, whatever else, there's a lot to it. And creating a space with a bunch of machines plugged in and saying you're free to do whatever you want isn't necessarily free for everybody who comes into that space. So I think there's a little bit of a myth here about what a makerspace is and who it serves, and that it needs to be explored more and looked at. And does makerspace include traditions like crocheting and sewing and other traditions of fabrication that come from different cultural roots? I think we're at the very beginning of this thing. I think this is the time to be critical of the maker movement. It has only been around for a couple of years. We all still have the opportunity to influence what that is and becomes.
That's sort of a mainstream term, you know. It asks the question, like, who gets to call themselves a maker? Like what you're talking about.
Yep.
Like, do you have to have money and access to tech shop, or buy yourself a 3D printer to be a maker? You know.
Well, that's the thing. I'm a maker. I make things. And it's not a bad word, but how it's been co-opted, there's a connotation to it, and there's whole swaths of people who aren't included in that just by like this other article that Jay sent me. Just, you know, like this woman who was being critical of the maker movement after there was a whole symposium of people like make, and then she's like, all men, you know, 85% of the covers are men. There's no one of color. There's very few. There's no diversity being as part of this movement. So there's a problem with the face of the maker movement. But the word maker is not a bad word. And when I was like posting about this thing, I wrote, there's fabricators and makers. I was like, ooh, bad word. I'm not going to insult them and call them makers. But like, what is that even about? We do make things. So, but and it goes along with this the chargedness of the word craft. You know, it's these one words that are supposed to catch all, and they don't. But somehow, where all the emphasis is put is like that's the connotation that word now gets, because I don't know, the most has been written about that, or the most has been spoken aloud about that.
So we are makers with small M's. We all
Small
M makers. But we make objects, we make things, and this question partly comes out of my experience of jurying and craft show on the East Coast, and I was just like, oh, so much stuff. It's just too much stuff of whatever quality, just too much. too many objects. And are we too fixated on objects, on things? And where we're at, are we too fixated on individuals? So you have discussed collaboration. And if we were less focused on objects and individuals, what would we be talking about in relation to all of this? We all just go on. I don't know. Even fine furniture. Sometimes I'm like, it's just more stuff.
It is. But I think that less stuff is better. It makes you. I operate better with less stuff, but I operate well with very nice stuff. So the stuff I've over time gotten rid of the clothes that suck, or or now I spend more money on one thing that it brings me joy, and it's that whole Marie Kondo tidy thing that swept the nation. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do, because you clean your closet. But that was like, there's a lot to that, where the world is filled with stuff. If you go to West Coast Craft, it's like, I don't actually need all of this stuff. It's really well made, but I don't need it. It's just more stuff. But having a connection to whatever the object is, that's where there's resonance for me. It's not about having more. It's about either making something where I just love how that came together, or those two materials just really sing. But it's hard as an artist, I make work, I put it out there, and it's just more stuff, like that. But that's the thing about being an artist. I can't answer that part, but I can say less is more, nicer, better.
I also think that maybe when you can expand your understanding or conception of what good craft is, it doesn't have to be an object, doesn't have to be focused towards an object. It's not just craft, it's culture, it's our society in general. It's like we want the thing because it's easy to digest. Oh, I understand this thing. When it gets bigger, like Jay and I were talking earlier about, like, buildings are so difficult to design and build, and architects get a bad rap all the time, but it's tons of people, and to actually craft a building, like a nice building that everyone likes being in, maybe they don't know how to talk about it, but that's not an object. Hopefully it's part of a bigger ecosystem, part of the city fabric, part of an environment. And so, like, buildings or bigger urban systems, that can be, when they're well done, and it's considered, to me, I consider that a craft. There's a craft in getting that done. And so to maybe just to move the thinking away from the thing, but I totally agree, like, that, when it's done really well, I can accept that, and but yeah, in general, when we're talking about objects, there are too many, and it is something that we all have to kind of come to terms with.
Yeah, I suppose being the old guy and the really little guy, I kind of remember that. I remember when craft was a revolutionary act. Craftsmanship, and post World War II, craftsmen and women indulged in that activity because it was seen as a way of kind of fighting against global consumerism and fighting against the fact that everything was mass-produced, and it was a way of, sort of taking a stand against that, and to some extent, rather than the makers movement, but the hacker movement is, the equivalent of that now. I think where it's all grist for a mill that is about kind of reprocessing and rethinking our relationship to goods. Unfortunately, the side effect of that is we end up making goods. It's a kind of like a catch-22 situation by making a really beautiful piece of furniture that you've not seen anyone fabricate before. That was always my motivation for making things when I first got into furniture making. I just dreamt up things that I hadn't seen and I couldn't get, and I didn't want to go to, that was pre-IKEA, the equivalent, and pre-IKEA was pretty bad, IKEA was actually pretty good in that regard in some ways, And so it was the only way to actually make the things that had that kind of quality you're talking about, was to fabricate. And there was no internet to find it, you know, find some cool Japanese designer who was rehashing, you know, jeans, workman's clothes from the 40s. You know, there was no way to access that stuff. And so the only way to do it was to make it. And it was kind of a revolutionary act. And so, but unfortunately, you know, consumerist culture is really good at just kind of like drawing it straight back into the more of kind of buy and sell. And I don't know what the solution around that is really. For me, it's about the people, you know, all sorts of people, just being more in control of so that the first solution when you want something is not to pull out a credit card, but to pull out a tool, you know. And so it's more of an educational thing, and the consequence of that is there's going to be a lot of really bad stuff made by people who pulled out the tool rather than their credit card. Probably that's a better solution.
After they've taken the gateway drug,
Yeah,
then
that's
they
right.
get
But first they pull out their credit card.
Disgusting thing. And you know, for me, Etsy is the kind of the perfect example of that, where people have kind of, you know, thought, I'm going to make this 5,000 really beautiful felted bags, and it's just like, oh, please stop. I'm really happy that they are making the felted bags as well. You know, there's a kind of contradiction there. So I don't know how it's going to pan out in the long term, but this notion of a kind of localized culture where people are kind of making things and acquiring things from each other and their quality items, that's kind of my vision for the future. That is, I don't think it's going to stop the landfill in the short term, unfortunately. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe you guys have got the answer to some of these questions.
Move in for, it's good timing. Let's move into 7 questions. Do you guys have any questions you'd like to put?
This is something I was in the Handmade program, so it made me start to think about the cost that goes into taking so much time to make something that I know I and my fellow students I know Laura as well has thought about is there a responsibility to think about who you are making work for? Who can afford buying craft as opposed to sort of the most banal making yourself become a maker.
next question.
Yeah, I guess they really, you know, yes is the short answer. The longer answer might be, I think for all of us who are making one-off objects, we're making them for us. You know, that's the only consumer of those objects is us, and that's the reason I'm always surprised when people get bent out of shape when the world isn't beating a path to the door, wanting that amazing object, because it wasn't made for anybody else; it was made for you. And so, why should the world beat a path to your door to get that thing that you made for yourself? You know. But I think when it comes to producing things on a scale, any sort of scale, if you're actually producing things expecting more than one of them to exist in the world and to have a life, then yes, you have to make the decision about it. Even if you think it's a good idea, and even if you want to make it, does the world need it? You know, and how do you find the people in the world who need it? And how do you develop a relationship with them that's not just they should be buying my stuff because it's cool, but you know, there has to be a relationship, you know, and that's one of the reasons I think all of us really enjoy commission work, because it's just such a wonderful, someone comes to you, they like what you do, you have a relationship with them, you develop a kind of an idea between the two of you, and that thing is realised, and they help you know, buy your house and feed your kids, and, you know, live your life. And that's for me, that's a you know, I know that I've had some difficult clients in my time, but 95% of my client relationships are fantastic. I don't know, you know, they really help me engage with the world. So, you know, the kind of work that we see around us today, I can't see very much of it that's going to be produced and kind of sold in a kind of like repetitive way. I see it as it's a way of offering a set of skills to a group of people who might actually utilise that. It might be super elitist to think about that as well, you know, like, can everyone access that stuff? No, that's not the case. You know? So once again, it's this, get into the situation where only a certain group of people can afford the kind of work that we would like to find ourselves making, I guess.
I think that's a hard question to answer when this is what we're seeing, you know, in this room, and the context is so specific for this work.
But I do think it's so important to educate the people who are interested in your work about what it takes to make what you make. There's a lot of people who come to me and have come to my friends, and they want this thing made, and they want it made out of this kind of wood, and they need it yesterday, and you know, they're just dying to have it. And then you tell them what your rate is as a woodworker, and then they just can't even believe it. It's like they don't understand that it's not the same price as something they could buy at IKEA. And so there's some educating that needs to happen to the client, where they're paying for really hard labor, like just to mill the wood, that takes time, just to, you know, pick out the wood, all these things, like from very start to finish. That's your time is money, and of course, like, I think in the program you're really following your heart, and you probably fall in love with a piece of wood, and you're making a project based on what that wood said to you it needed to be, you know, and I'm all for that. And for me in my own work, I make it for myself. I make it because I have to make it, as dramatic as that sounds, but I really feel like it's essential for me. And and then if you can lower your price point, maybe you make additions, but you can do something you live with. But I think that making this kind of work, only a select few can afford it, and only a select few can say, yes, I'm gonna have it in my house where it could potentially get dinged. You know, like I can live with that. Like I have enough disposable income where I could handle if my daughter put her cup on it. You know, like,
Yeah.
that, you know, but I don't know. It's an excellent question. I think, but I do think that educating your client or your audience is also important, so they know what goes into that work. I mean, goes into your piece, which is work.
I have a comment and a question, I guess. A comment would be more about the maker movement discussion that you all were having, and I feel like there was something that you all sort of touched around the perimeter of, didn't quite like put your finger on, that I think is the way at least I feel about like maker movement stuff when we talked about it, is like talking about craft. The things that you're talking about loving about it seem to be like approaching like moral goods, like ethical things that enhance your life outside of your practice. Things like care and patience and appreciation and things like that, that when you foster them in your work, they extend out to the rest of your life too, and you become like a better person because of it, and it's like a larger thing than that, and it enhances you morally. Whereas the maker movement kinds of things kind of start and end with the making, and like you're kind of the same person at the end. Like you talk about like joy coming from it, and you have like this experience of like a temporary joy from the completion, or like just the thrill of it. But at the end of that joy, you come back down and you're the same person, and you haven't changed. You haven't like, and then that's I think what's missing maybe about some of those maker things, is like the morality of it, and becoming a better person because of it.
Absolutely, and I think like Donald said, what good could come out of it is that maybe one person out of however many actually that those moral values, those moral implications do kind of register and catch on, and it does affect their life in some way beyond like, I'm supposed to check this off the list and this, or like, I'm a maker. That identity, it's like just buying like this identity.
Yeah.
Think of, sorry, making that. Yeah, I think I got a little offended when you guys talked about the maker movement, because I think that there's a level to it that a lot of people don't respect, because the people who have been doing it for so long see it as kind of cultural appropriation. You know, we were doing this when it wasn't cool to do it. And we've been doing this and we've kind of dedicated our life to this. But I've seen a lot of people get introduced to our world through that and then become very entwined with it. And I think the commercialization is the really big thing that we're all pissed off about. Because Make Magazine does not represent the major maker movement as a whole. It happened to be a publication that had some money at the time and saw an avenue to make some money on subscriptions and things like that. I think that independent spaces across the United States and across the world that have poked up that are not tech shop, that do not have the tech money behind it, are doing the same thing that tech shop is doing, but it's all of a sudden cool because it's people like us who came together who have been doing it for a long time. So I think that don't be so quick to say I hate that or and I deal with it too. Like I see that Make Magazine on the shelves and I'm just like, eesh. But I think that it's important for me to understand that maybe some kid picks it up and thinks it's cool and gets introduced to our world because we work in an analog practice and with a little bit of tech getting integrated into that. But we are in a very tech-heavy world, so I think it's important to be as embracing as we can about introducing all we can to everyone we can.
I think that there's a real danger here in equating craft practices with moral higher ground. I think it's something that we might all be in a bit of the trap, and we might be in fact perpetuating it through some of the ways we're talking about it. But I do think it's something we have to be very careful about because equating craft techniques and processes with higher moral ground also comes along with this is the right way to do it, this is what it looks like when it's done right, this is who looks right doing it. And then that, that comes with its own really sneaky biases. So I think it is dangerous, and I definitely fall prey to that at times. I apologize publicly, but I also think that there's something about this question about making objects and filling the world up with stuff is that I'll say for myself, like I think it also comes from like a deep human insecurity. Like I want to see things in the world that I can touch that remind me that I'm okay, I'm who I am, I'm who I thought I was 3 hours ago before that one conversation, whatever it is. I like to come home to the things in my house that have that meaning so that I can remind myself, I did make this chair. Like it was a hard day, but you know what? I did make this chair. I think there's an important relationship there. I think there's something about these objects that reflects back to us an identity that relationship is more intense than the idea of filling up the world with objects. And I say that's talking about like the kind of things we're looking at in this room that reflects somebody else's relationship to that piece of material, their own learning process, their own empowerment through the course of making that thing. And I think for that, the object question, it kind of undoes the object question for me because I would love for the world to be filled with these things that reinforce people's confidence and identity and willingness to explore the world. And I think that there's a lot in the maker movement that does that too. And for like, as an entryway drug for a lot of people, like making their own alarm clock, then they go to the hardware store and they have a vocabulary to talk with the clerk at the hardware store and say, I know what I'm asking for this time, and I'm going to try this bigger project. I think that is important. And it's dangerous territory to think that there's a specific way of doing this that is going to have that end result that's about identity and process and knowing the world and understanding material that's a better way to get there than another. And I think we all have to be careful about that. And at the same time, we have to be critical of this maker thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the tricky part is just like, I think it's like seeing the craft itself as being the moral good versus just focusing on yourself and gaining. There's other ways to gain patience and to gain care-kindness and to gain these kinds of like things. It's not the only way. And if you can appreciate it as a thing to do that, and it doesn't necessarily mean that like maker movement is bad for not doing that, and that's good for you to point out. But It's, I think, like it's just good to remind ourselves that like we can get those kinds of things out of something like that. Like we can actually become better people by doing this, and you can also become a better person by doing all kinds of other things too. And so, but yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm not a woodworker. I'm one of your subs. I have an upholstery shop in the city, and I work with a lot of woodworkers. We do a lot of jobs with tech firms where you come up with these amazing ideas, and then I get called in the last minute to make it comfortable. I never see the drawings. I've never talked to the woodworker. I just come in and they've used it for 2 weeks and it has to be modified. Not like I touch the wood. Add comfort. So I'm just very curious as to a better way for the trades, the people you sub out to better work with woodworkers, so we're not coming in after the fact.
This is such a major part of exhibit development at the Exploratorium, and it's something we would fight so hard for, the core group of exhibit developers. And I've met you before through Hannah, so hi. But where designers would come in and they'd have these ideas for, they would show drawings, and actually things would be, like gravity wasn't part of the drawing, which is always interesting. Like, oh, it's hovering, that's so cool. But where iteration was not part of the design process, and doing something out of like cardboard and really modest materials, or just figuring out angles, like none of that stuff was done ahead of time, and so we would just have it beat in our heads that like iteration, and then talk to humans, get them to actually sit in your pieces and figure out how they are going to use something, and actually watch what people naturally do at this thing you've plopped on the floor. And if it's exactly what you predicted, great, but guaranteed there's things that they'll do that you never imagined that'll completely inform how you could better the design. And so design has to do with iteration and watching the user. And so the person, the human, is essential in figuring out what is comfortable. And yeah, there's ADA recommendations of what, of like who you should build things for, and how accessible things should be, and what the right angle is that feels good on your lumbar. There's all of that, but it's really getting a wide group of people to humanly react to whatever you're presenting them before you've made it out of the last tree standing, and you've made it out of something that you could easily modify. So my advice would be like, tell them to iterate. At least. And not expect, your beautiful cushion to fix their total shit design. It's impossible.
Or tell them in the future to bring you on board early to consult. And this is a problem in general with with architecture. My shopmate's a metal worker who mainly his main work is doing other people's designs. He's just more of a strict fabricator than I am, and we laugh all the time, and we're getting drawings that are gravityless, or even the most basic things like a section of steel or something that just doesn't exist, and someone's drawn it, but they want it. So it's like you didn't even bother to look at a book, and it's just, I don't know if it's a time thing, it's an education thing, it's that people should get out and make some things as more of a part of design education. There's a whole slew of problems, but like the seat cushion and woodworking, that's like one facet of, I think, of many sort of in the design world.
Okay, we have time for one more. Back there.
seems to be that a lot of the culture on technology that's interesting is its collaborative nature. This idea of like open source and that things sort of don't have a specific author, whereas making traditionally comes from like a very singular voice or hand design making idea of a creator. Are you seeing a new kind of person who makes as a collaborative, or who doesn't have a specific identity as a person, or is it still individuals making? Has that changed in your views?
I'll say.
Can you rephrase the question?
Let's see if I can rephrase. Are you seeing, well, so much in the technology world is collaborative rather than coming from a solo individual. Do you see that coming, I don't know, you're teaching or you're encountering people, do you see people being much more willing to not be solo makers, not be individuals, to be collaborators? Is that a fair assessment of your question? Or fair Jay, you had a...
Oh, I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up a question with the word community in it, because I wrote that down in my notes before. We got to talk about community. It's so important. It's such a huge part of what we do at the Pier and I think this is also to your question about, is there craft beyond objects? And I really think that part of what we've done at the Pier is craft community, and through that a lot of collaboration. And I think it's super exciting and inspiring to see people come into the program through our artists in residence who they generally have that imposter syndrome when they first get there. They're like, I don't know how I got in. I had proposed this crazy project that's way beyond anything I know how to do because I thought I should. And then they get in and find other people to collaborate with, and those ideas change and evolve into really like much more powerful projects. And I see that like sort of unraveling that fear about ego coming in. It's really cool. And I think that's a wonderful part of what is happening with craft. And people are working across mediums. So there's an Arduino element, there's a water jet element, there's a wood element, and it's so much richer. And I think that's something we're benefiting from the tech, from the open source, from the maker movement, is that collaboration isn't a threat in any way, and that it's something people are now seeking out as part of the residency. I think it's super exciting. It's something that feels really good to be a part of.
Yeah, I think it's actually kind of an inherent problem in a lot of craft practices and education, especially. As someone who has formulated a program in furniture design at California College of the Arts, students, we don't get them to collaborate very much because they don't like it very much. They have their own particular desires and wants, and they don't want to have to kind of deal with some other student who's got a different idea. And so getting group projects launched is always a total headache. But at the same time, I think it's the only way forward for maybe it gets back to your question a minute ago, like how do we find kind of a context for the work. And you really do need to have a community around the work. Either and all of you who've come through this kind of program, you've been working in this amazingly rich community with a shared language, and I know that that's a problem, that when you come out into the rest of the world and people don't share that language, how do you get them up to speed? How do you get them speaking your language? And it comes down to the upholstery question as well. The only way that can happen is if we work collaboratively right from the get-go. And I think in the craft world, if there is such a thing as a craft world, that's something that's really lacking. That notion of the kind of individual craftsman in their own studio is still a really important part of our self-image, and it's a dangerous one. I think it leads to isolation, disconnection, a lack of audience, resentment, angry old craftsmen in their workshop saying, I've been doing this for 30 years and still nobody cares about it. It's like, that's why. You've been doing it in your workshop for 30 years. Nobody cares about it. That's a kind of like a self-manifesting thing. So I agree. I think that sort of, that notion of building a community around your work and building a community within which you work is really critical. And maybe that's the best thing that's coming out of the makers movement. I think that notion that you don't do anything in isolation, you have to work in collaboration with other people seems super critical to me.
I think also viewing critiques of your work and conversations about your work as you're making it is a collaboration.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's where school is good, and like there is a lot of that, and where people learn a language, and especially when there's like parameters, or like this is how we're gonna constructively talk about work, and so people learn how to say their heartfelt feelings in a constructive way. But I know in my own work, I definitely talk to people who I know more than me about various things, to workshop ideas, and I ask about colors. You know, like it's really generative and exciting for me, and that's what. And so I feel like many pieces aren't just me; there's critique involved. You know, and so that's a form of collaboration, even if it's not by this person and that person. Yeah. And I want to say too, I think, and I'm just looking at Paige, I think the Instructables, what they're doing is so important. There's so many times I've like looked up how to blah blah blah, and that's what pops up. And there's really thoughtful, well-written things, and then there's people who are critiquing. Well, have you tried this? And then the author actually says, oh yeah, where there's actually a conversation happening. It's not just dead in the water. So it stays alive. I think that's where I feel things are working, you know, because I'm sorry you got offended by our, but like that's where I feel like in the maker movement things are productive, and it's a good place. But yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. And I need to draw things to a conclusion here. I want to thank you all so much. The depth and range that you took this discussion to has been really informative to me. I hope it's been really good for you guys too. Thank you for coming.